You get off the plane, you settle into wherever you have landed, and one by one, your Singapore apps start acting strange. The local streaming app that worked at home now hides half its catalog or refuses to play. A service you use every week sits on a loading spinner and never finishes. An app you have had for years suddenly wants to verify you all over again. You try a VPN, it feels solved for about a minute, and then the same apps get suspicious anyway. Today I want to explain why your Singapore apps break the moment you leave Singapore, and how a real Singapore phone you can reach from anywhere quietly fixes it. I run more than 100 real cloud Android phones in Singapore, genuine Samsung handsets, each on its own persistent Singapore mobile IP, on a real carrier SIM, reachable over an AdBeep endpoint with an API to list and lock any phone, and a live view you open right in your browser. So here is the verdict up front. An app that geofences you is not reading a single number, it is reading a whole stack of signals about where you are. And the only thing that satisfies all of them at once is a real Singapore device, genuinely sitting on a Singapore network. Let me walk through what those signals are and why the usual shortcut cannot beat them. First, what does Singapore only even mean? A lot of apps and services are tied to the country on purpose. Streaming catalogs are licensed region by region, so the same app shows a different library depending on where you are. Some banking and government-linked services only answer local connections. Local pricing, promotions, and loyalty perks are region-locked, and a handful of apps are simply not offered at all outside the country. None of that is an accident or a bug you can report. It is a business or a legal boundary the app was built to enforce, and enforcing it means the app has to work out where you actually are. So most people reach for a VPN first, and I understand why. You pick a Singapore server, you get a Singapore IP, and for about a minute it feels like the problem is gone. Then the app checks a second signal and the whole thing comes apart. A commercial VPN exit is a data center address, and any app that cares about location knows those hosting ranges by heart. So it sees a Singapore IP that belongs to a server farm rather than a person, and it trusts that even less than it would trust an honest address from the country you are actually in. This is the part people miss. The first thing an app reads is your IP and the network sitting behind it. It's ASIN. A real Singapore mobile carrier looks like a place where ordinary people live, because that is exactly who is on it. A hosting network looks like a place where machines live, because that is what runs there. A VPN hands you the second kind of network wearing a Singapore label. And that mismatch, a normal consumer app arriving from a machine network, is a red flag all by itself before the app has looked at anything else. And location is never just one reading. A modern phone app can look at the IP, the GPS position the device reports, the home network baked into the SIM, the device time zone, the language settings, even the Wi-Fi networks nearby. A VPN on your foreign laptop or your foreign phone changes exactly one of those, the IP. Every other signal still says, plainly, that you are sitting in another country. The app does not need to catch you in a lie. It just weighs the disagreement between all those signals and quietly decides you are not where you claim to be. A real Singapore cloud phone answers all of that in the most boring way possible. It does not fake any of the signals. It genuinely is every one of them. The IP is a real Singapore carrier address. The SIM is a real Singapore line with a real Singapore number. The device time zone is Singapore. The network is Singapore. The whole environment is Singapore, because the phone is physically sitting in a rack in Singapore. There is no disagreement anywhere for the app to catch, because every single signal is telling the same true story at the same time. So where does that leave you, the person who is not in Singapore? You are wherever you happen to be, on your own laptop or your own phone, and you reach the Singapore handset the same way you would reach any remote machine. You open a live view in your browser, and you are looking at a real Singapore phone, tapping its screen, scrolling, typing, using the app exactly as if you were holding it back home. Your own connection carries the video and the taps back and forth, but the app running on that phone only ever sees the phone and its Singapore network. You are the operator, not the location. Fortunati's case, a local streaming service whose catalog is licensed for Singapore only. From abroad, it hides half the library, or tells you the title is not available in your region. Open the same app on a real Singapore phone and it behaves completely normally because from its point of view, nothing has changed at all. You are watching the thing you already pay for every month from wherever you happen to have woken up without the app ever knowing you left. Or take the everyday accounts that get twitchy the moment your location jumps countries. An account that has signed in from Singapore for years then suddenly appears from the far side of the world overnight. Looks alarming to any system watching for stolen logins, and you get hit with extra checks and friction every time. Keeping a steady Singapore phone as the place that account actually lives means it keeps signing in from the same city, the same network, and the same device it always has. The account stops looking like it was stolen because from the outside nothing about it moved. Then there is the business version of this, which is honestly where it earns its keep. Maybe you run a Singapore-facing business or manage local accounts, but you or your team are not always in the country. You need to see what a Singapore customer actually sees, respond from a genuine Singapore presence, and keep local tools and accounts reachable no matter who is traveling. A small set of real Singapore phones gives a scattered team one steady local footing that does not pack up and move every time somebody gets on a plane. The persistence is the part that makes any of this worth it. Each phone keeps the same handset, the same real number, and the same persistent Singapore mobile IP, week after week and month after month. So the app is not meeting a total stranger every session. It is meeting the same familiar Singapore device it saw last time. A presence that changed its network every hour, the way a rotating VPN does, would raise the exact alarms you were trying to avoid in the first place. Steady and ordinary is the whole point, and it genuinely has to be a real device, not an emulator dressed up to look like one. The same apps that check where you are also check whether they are running on real hardware. An emulator trips those integrity checks, gets quietly locked out of the very apps you are trying to use, and never presents a convincing environment anyway. A genuine Samsung handset passes those checks for the simplest reason there is. It is not pretending to be a phone, it just is one. Because the phone is reachable over app deep, you are not limited to poking at the screen by hand whenever you remember to. You can keep an app logged in and warm so it never forgets you. Have it forward the notifications you actually care about. Run a scheduled check or wire it into your own tools. So it is not only a window you open to a Singapore phone when you need one. It can quietly keep your Singapore presence alive and logged in even while you are asleep on the other side of the planet. Let me be honest about the cost of doing it this way. There is a little more latency than a phone in your hand, because every tap and every frame of video is traveling to Singapore and back to wherever you are. For using apps, watching, reading, checking and logging in, that is completely fine and you stop noticing it within minutes. For Twitch Reflex mobile gaming, it is not the right tool, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. What you are buying is a genuine Singapore vantage point, not a local one, and that trait is the entire reason it works. I also want to be clear about the boundary, because this sits right next to things it must never become. This is for reaching your own accounts and your own services, the ones you genuinely have every right to use from wherever you happen to be standing. It is honest continuity for a real Singapore person or a real Singapore business. It is not a way to fake a residency you do not have, slip past sanctions, defeat a fraud control that exists for a good reason, or pretend to be somebody you are not. A real device does not make any of that acceptable, so keep it strictly to what is honestly and already yours, and be fair about what it simply cannot do. It will not resurrect an account you were properly banned from. It will not override a check that is meant to keep you out for a legitimate reason. It does not turn you into a Singapore resident for anything that legally requires you to actually be one. What it removes is one specific maddening obstacle, the network and the device looking foreign, in the case where your underlying right to use the app was never in question to begin with. People ask, why not just leave a spare phone plugged in at a friend's place back home and remote into that? You can, and it works for about a month, right up until the prepaid SIM needs a top-up. The phone reboots after a system update and never comes back. The battery swells on a charger that was left on for a year, or your friend rearranges the room and moves the router. Keeping a single phone alive and reachable from the far side of the world is a genuine ongoing chore, and it is precisely the chore you were trying to escape when you went looking for a better answer. That is the whole reason cloud.one exists. Real Samsung handsets in Singapore on dedicated hardware, each with its own persistent Singapore mobile IP, on a real carrier SIM, Singtel, StarHub, M1 or Wi-Fi. Not a VPN, not a data center address, not an emulator wearing a Singapore label, a genuine Singapore phone you can open in your browser from anywhere in the world, reach over an ADB endpoint, drive through an API, and control live on screen. Start at cloud.one and use code YT30 on your first month. So to recap, your Singapore apps break abroad because they read a whole stack of location signals, not just your IP, and a VPN only ever changes one of them, while the rest give you away. A real Singapore cloud phone satisfies every one of those signals at once because it genuinely is a Singapore device on a Singapore network, and you simply reach it from wherever you are. Keep it to your own accounts, accept the little bit of latency, and your Singapore apps stop caring which country you happen to wake up in this morning. I'll see you in the next one.